Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel. The panel discussion is Society as Medium, Objects as Anchors, Material, Narrative, and Memory. And we'd like to thank ADMAF and SEMA. We'd also like to thank the Korean Cultural Center, who, in partnership, these talks are being organized. And we'd like to thank the two artists here today who are joining us for the conversation. I'd like to start off by introducing the artists to you and to the theme of the panel today. So Sojung is a Seoul-based artist, and she's working primarily with video installation, writing, and sound. She constructs nonlinear space-time structures that evoke new perceptions of history and the present, and you can see her work. She has 3 pieces in the exhibition here. Through diverse sensory approaches, she contemplates and engages with the voices, landscapes, and temporalities of overlooked figures within the ruins of modernity. And her work particularly explores transnational identities, investigating the fate of multi-species communities and their interwoven connections. She's participated in numerous solo and group exhibitions at institutions such as the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, the Seoul Museum of Art, the Kunstmuseum Bern, the Nan Joan Pike Art Center, Ateliers Hermiat, the Palace de Tokyo in Paris, to name just a few. She's also been awarded the Foundation Enterprise de Hermes Art Prize and the Noon Art Prize at the Guangzhou Biennale, and her work is part of collections all around the world, from the Steinert Museum in Amsterdam, the Singapore Art Museum, just to name a few. Okay, and Rand, Abdul Jabbar. Rand borrows from the vestiges and inferior of history to produce reconstructions of accumulations of past events as they intersect with personal experiences. She explores the relationship to place and landscape while in a state of displacement. She contests individual and collective memory while engaging with legacies of archaeology, mythology, and material culture through extensive research with archives and museum collections, employing sculpture, writing, video, and installation as primary mediums. Her work unfolds through an experiential dialogue between recollections and reimaginations, inventing a set of anchors that facilitate their telling and adaptation of the past into a site of reclamation of agency and the affirmation of identity. She received the award of the Richard Mille Art Prize at the Louvre in Abu Dhabi in 2022. And she also has a Master's of Architecture from Columbia, where she was awarded the William Kinn Fellowship Traveling Prize, and her work has been acquired by ADMAF, as well as other collections across the world. And she's participated in numerous exhibitions, having a major installation at Al-Ala last year too. Okay, so this particular panel is going to be looking at questions around memory, around objects that persist across time and space, and how objects become focal points around which communities, identities, and histories take shape, whether they're from traditional crafts and ritual items to incidental domestic bric-a-brac. Objects can anchor deeply personal or collective narratives. Through these objects, though we might think and we might perceive them to be immutable and static, in fact their stories are never fixed and they're always transforming. When gravitating around artifacts, culture is felt in material and very tangible ways, yet generations and geographies will understand the same object quite differently. This subjective independence of material and memory and narrative means that while objects might travel, their precise meanings do not always move with them. What is sincerely felt in one place or time does not necessarily translate. And it's really interesting to see how these artists kind of probe those questions through their practice and the works that they make. Okay, I'm going to start by posing my first question to the artists. So, objects play a central role in your practice, in both your practices. Could you discuss ways in which you explore the relationship between objects and personal and collective memory in your work? And I think our first slides will be with Sojung. Yes.
Thank you for the introduction, Tina. Thanks to the support by the Korean Cultural Center. Today I'm gonna speak in Korean. Yeah. 사실 제가 관심 있게 다루어온 주제라는 것은 그 아시아의 어떤 근대성의 복잡함이라고 볼 수 있을 것 같습니다. 특히나 한국이 근대라는 시간을 굉장히 압축적으로 통과해 온 경험이 있고, 이를테면 분단이라든지 혹은 식민의 경험이라든지 그리고 이후에 어떤 자본주의라든지 분단에 이르기까지 그리고 그 가운데서 굉장히 많은 어떤 개인들의 목소리 그리고 어떤 풍경 그리고 시간들이 상실되어 온 그 경험들 그리고 그것들에 좀 주목하는 작업을 해왔습니다. 이번 전시에서는 세 작품을 보여주고 있는데요. 먼저 온 미래라는 작품, 그리고 이클립스, 그리고 그린 스크린, 이 세 작품 모두 다 이 한국의 이 분단 현실이 우리에게 어떤 경험과 기억들을 주고 있는지를 어떤 소리로서 탐구하고 있다고 볼 수 있겠습니다. 오브제 사물에 관해서 얘기를 해보자면 아마 이 작품들에 공통되게 등장하고 있는 어떤 악기에 관한 이야기들을 해볼 수 있을 것 같습니다. 특히 이 이클립스라는 작품의 경우에는 이 한국의 분단 상황에서 고민을 했던 또 고통받았던 윤이상이라는 작곡가, 특히 베를린에서는 굉장히 활발하게 활동했던 이 작곡가의 삶과 음악을 또 중심으로 하고 있지만, 한편으로는 북한 가야금의 어떤 목소리에 관한 것이다라고 볼 수도 있을 것 같습니다. 윤이상은 사실은 동양의 악기의 기법들을 서양 악기에 적용하면서 일종의 동서양의 조화를 이루고자 했던 사람인데요. 북한 가야금의 경우에는 6, 70년대에 그 러시아의 영향을 받아서 동양 음계인 오음계를 넘어서서 서양 음계까지도 연주할 수 있도록 변형이 된 악기입니다. 그래서 이 작업은 사실은 물론 이 분단을 다루는 작업들에서 흔히 소환하는, 이를테면 어떤 합일이라든지 혹은 뭐 우정이라든지 이런 어떤 민족주의적인 가치를 넘어서 그 사이에 어떤 우리가 반추할 수 있는 일종의 틈 같은 것들을 소리로서 탐구하고 있습니다.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to ADMAF and the Korean Cultural Center for inviting us for this conversation today. I think this is, a topic, this sort of relationship to objects is something that's really at the heart of my work, and it comes from maybe a deeply personal experience as well. So for context, I was born in Iraq, but we left when I was 5 years old, and that created this sense of, a rift or a displacement between a kind of homeland and where you are. And at a very early age, my parents sort of filled our house with all these kind of objects and memorabilia, craft objects, tapestries, ceramics. And for me, these were almost like my toys growing up, kind of trying to understand or imagine this place that is very much present in the kind of the stories they tell and the memories that they pass on, but also has a lot of painful attachments to it. And so in a way, it's almost like the Iraq I knew was the Iraq of their past and never of the present moment. And so objects, I think, for me, have this sense of being able to bridge across time. And especially if we're thinking about historic artifacts or museum objects, they have this duality of having kind of belonged to a certain era, but also existing with us and being kind of directly accessible to our senses today. So from this kind of deeply personal experience of really understanding the power or the potential of objects to transcend time, to take you to another place. I share this work tracing origins that is actually a larger series that are tracings of my mother's collection of ceramic objects that were really these kind of very early encounters with a material culture. I think as a child, I was sort of interested in, playing with their grooves and their shapes and imagining the architecture and the landscape. But today, reflecting on a lot of these objects, I see them, beyond their aesthetic value, but also as a kind of material embodiment of earth, of land. Almost as if that was kind of displaced with us. And, taking this personal kind of encounter, relationship, I was invited a few years back, actually right during the COVID lockdown, by the Shubak Festival in London to host a series of workshops with women of the Arab diaspora in London, but also in this example, this is actually the work of one of the participants, Asma Al-Isa. And we used this relationship, like objects that we've inherited or objects that we've brought with us from our home country to really interrogate our relationship to home, to questions of memory, but also, the more difficult, more painful aspects of that conversation. And what I was interested in is producing what we called a series of recordings, so almost like a record, how an object or a text or a poem, or their results were quite varied in their outputs, how they could serve as a way to almost mark your own personal story, especially coming from a place that tends to be quite misunderstood, is either looked at from these historic colonial lenses and these archives and collections around the world, or portrayed in the media as a kind of, space of violence, the axis of terror, as I was a teenager kind of growing up. And from there, inviting this kind of collective conversation to actually kind of pan out. This was a work that resulted from another workshop participant, Intisar Hajali, who tells the story of her home garden in Syria, kind of longing for the jasmine tree. And so I worked with Intisar on developing what started as a poem into this performative walk through London's Chelsea Physic Garden, where alongside her performance, there are a series of sculptures that are kind of mediating between the space of the garden and what is, at the same time, a very personal but also kind of quite universal story that resonated with us as a group. So for example, in this work that's facing the jasmine tree, which is a kind of important character in her story, the sculpture is almost like leaning into its memory, but at the same time, it's sort of being kind of spread apart, that distance of time, that distance of place is also felt. And actually, I was very fortunate to have the support of Abu Dhabi Art in bringing this work and having it hosted in Abu Dhabi at Al Imarat Park, where it kind of took on a kind of new meaning by having one of Intisar's close friends who comes from the same village performing it on her behalf. And so these stories kind of start to get passed on and almost adopted by others along the way.
Thank you, thank you. It's really interesting to think about how both smell and then the object and stories and sound also all become, so the different senses become all kind of embodied in these choreographies with objects. And I think too the way in which we also the objects carrying these ideas, but we also project onto them. So as you were speaking, I was thinking about the dislocation of the object in the museum, and then also in the home, but then the importance of where it's positioned and placed becomes also so significant to like articulations of identity and memories too in those spaces. So from the museum to the home, these objects take, and then to the garden as well, and the way smell can be so strong in evoking a relationship to place. Both of you work with processes of making, particularly in relation to traditions of making in different fields. I wonder if you could both kind of discuss some of those in your work.
물론 작업은 그 코어의 사운드와 음악이 있고 뭐 어떤 전통 음악과 현대 음악 사이를 가로지르는 내용들이 있지만 특히나 먼저 온 미래라는 작품의 제작 과정에 대해서 조금 이야기를 해보면 흥미롭지 않을까라는 생각이 듭니다. 사실은 제가 밴드를 하고 있는데요. 밴드를 하면서 아코디언 음악을 좀 배우고 싶어서 그 악기를 배우게 됐는데 사실은 남한에서는 그것이 그렇게 흔히 쓰이는 악기가 아니고 제가 악기를 배울 수 있는 친구가 사실은 이 탈북한 북에서 탈출한 친구였고 사실은 그것이 굉장히 북한에서는 익숙한 거의 모든 이 여학생들이 이 연주하는 악기라는 것을 알게 되었어요. 이 작품은 먼저 온 미래라는 제목의 작품이고요. 사실 10년 전이죠. 딱 10년 전에 그 서울시립미술관에서 북한을 주제로 하는 그리고 광복 70년을 기념하는 북한을 주제로 하는 전시에 초대받았을 때 과연 내가 북한에 관해서 알고 있는 게 무엇인가? 이런 질문을 하게 되었어요. 그런데 돌이켜 보니까 사실은 북한에 관해서 제가 알고 있는 것은 그곳에 갈 수 있는 유럽인들 혹은 저널리스트들이 촬영해온 이미지에 불과한 것이 아니었나? 그런 생각이 들었습니다. 그래서 만약에 제가 북한에 관한 작업을 한다면 실제 제가 경험한 것으로밖에 얘기를 할 수 없겠다라는 생각이 들었고 그래서 이 탈북 피아니스트와 나만의 피아니스트를 초청한 작업을 계획하게 되었습니다. 먼저 온 미래라는 제목은 사실은 이 남한에 거주하고 있는 이 탈북민들이 스스로, 그러니까 아주 먼 미래에 하나된 어떤 한국을 떠올리면서 스스로를 부르는 용어에서 제가 착안해서 가지고 온 제목이고요. 사실 작업 과정에서는 굉장히 많은 갈등과 또 다툼이 있었습니다. 그래서 아이디어는 굉장히 어린 시절에 즐겨 불렀던 일종의 북한의 노동요이기도 한 이 용광기날이라는 곡과 남한에서는 굉장히 흔히 불리는 엄마야 누나야라는 두 동요를 가지고 와서 두 개의 곡을 각자 연주하고 그리고 그것의 어떤 대치와 대립 가운데서 하나의 일종의 합의로서 굉장히 일시적인 합의인 거죠. 하나의 곡을 만들어내는 과정을 기록하고 있고요. 그래서 이것이 처음에 세마에서 전시되었을 때 한국의 관객들에게 이 용광기날이라는 곡은 거의 들어본 적 없는 굉장히 낯선 청각적인 경험인 반면에 또 이 한국의 엄마야 누나야라는 곡은 굉장히 익숙한 곡이어서 굉장히 그 청각적 경험 가운데서의 이 갭이 굉장히 흥미롭게 작용하는 작품이었습니다. 사실 10년에 넘는 기간 동안을 굉장히 여러 국가에서 전시를 하게 됐었는데요. 이것이 물론 남북의 어떤 분단의 현실에 관한 내용을 백그라운드로 하고 있지만 그것이 보여지는 장소의 갈등이나 역사를 환기시킨다는 점이 굉장히 좀 흥미로웠던 것 같습니다.
Yeah, the artist says that it was particularly interesting that over the 10 years these works have been shown throughout, and that through this it kind of also reminds the audience to think more about the histories and conflicts that people may have.
Thank you. This question of the harmony and disjuncture is really interesting to kind of think about, and particularly that the works are often, a lot of your works are non-linear, so that they're kind of exploring history and perceptions of history, but through a non-linear way. So, yeah, this not trying to create something that's completely harmonious, but having harmony and disjuncture is something that really comes to the fore in the works through the music. Yeah, thank you, Rand.
Yeah, I think in terms of the question of kind of materiality in the work, I think maybe to return to this relationship I had to these kind of ceramic objects as a child, I think I became kind of drawn to that material, but it was really in 2018 when I visited Iraq for the first time after, I guess, 23 years of being away. And I was sort of, visiting various historic sites, archaeological sites, and having these very direct encounters with land, with, this kind of mud brick, this, culture of clay, that I, was very much interested in. How can you think about these also embodied histories and the way that we have a relationship with a material like clay that is kind of so central to our history. And so, the material becomes both in this kind of in its physical aspect and its haptic aspect, but it's also the material that is these kind of the research and the lost fragments. And so in this work, Earthly Wonders, Celestial Beings, which is a kind of ongoing body of work that I really see as almost like where I find my language. There are over, I think maybe now like 150, objects that are small and feel like these kind of quick studies for me, but they were my way of kind of trying to understand my relationship to a material like ceramics, but also think about the kind of iconography of forms and the repetition of symbols across, a 5,000-year history, especially objects that my source materials are very much kind of, historic artifacts within museum collections around the world, but ones that have been looted and stolen and, trafficked and lost and destroyed through various kind of cycles of violence throughout our history. Is how do you actually allow the object and its language to enter into the language of your work and think about like propagating that towards the future. So each object almost has its genesis within the historic, but together they're like a series of fragments that together tell the story of this history that I'm kind of trying to put together, but also thinking about the relationship between the objects and the space between them. I think that's something that has been, preoccupying me lately, and especially in thinking about some of the more large-scale iterations of these work that are to come.
I think something so interesting about these is also their scale. They kind of call you to a particular intimacy, and you really kind of want to pick them up, and they have that kind of draw. And also, as you said, the spaces between them almost become like a language, or almost like an alphabet that you could begin to, or like words that you can begin to kind of arrange in in different ways. But even kind of the glazes and the form also kind of call to, again, to like between this constant dialogue between spaces of kind of museums and spaces of the home. You can kind of see constantly kind of this dialogue going back and forth.
Yeah, and maybe something, this was from the installation at the Louvre a couple of years ago, and we had this whole discussion around like, ways to display them, and I think there was a kind of interest in maybe using very traditional museological displays, which I felt really kind of suffocate the work. And so, in kind of thinking about this plinth that I designed for them, it was also about these kind of layers, like layers of history, almost feeling like an incision in the ground of an archaeological site, where you kind of start to see them really interacting with each other, but also walking around them and exploring that relationship between them.
Yes, I remember that this moving around them in a very different way than you do inside. Having them in like glass cases of museums would have created such a very different experience. And even as you said, the heights of it really changed the relationship to the audience. And in a sense, also its tactility that you wanted to kind of pull from there. Okay, I have another question for you all. So site and location have informed specific works, and you've also translated pieces into large-scale works, Rand. Maybe you could speak to us a little bit about how scale has how you've evolved.
Yeah, I think going from this very intimate scale of the hand, which is and kind of being also trained as an architect and kind of thinking about how you sort of move through space. It's been really only recently that I've been able to realize these at a larger scale, at a scale that you can also kind of start to inhabit. For Desert X Al-Ula, as part of our kind of research trips to the site, I encountered this engraving on the wall in Hegra that depicts this kind of trinity of deities that actually trace their history back, across various cultures and civilizations, but very directly to ancient Mesopotamian culture. And this whole story is actually related to humanity's relationship to the stars. It was the planet Venus. It was the way it moved and the way it kind of in its movement disappeared and then reappeared that influenced and inspired so many myths about these cycles of kind of death and resurrection and rebirth. And having the opportunity to kind of produce work within this kind of open desert valleys of Al-Ula that are very much kind of exposed to the sky and the clear night sky and the starry night, I think was really special and kind of reflecting also in the way that we've kind of lost our relationship to the celestial in a way. Like very rarely do we even see the stars, but that relationship has influenced our humanity and the way we understand the world for kind of thousands of years. So it was a way to kind of reflect on that relationship once again. The kind of figure gazing out into the sky and kind of reflecting on our own journey. Our own journey that has its kind of battles, but also has this kind of hope for the star to rise again kind of tomorrow. So that whole work was really kind of playing on using the site as a way to reflect to our relationship to the celestial. And maybe more recently, and this work is actually still, it's here, it's near the Corniche. It feels a bit surreal to drive past it. But it's, it was a way for me to kind of also reflect on kind of my relationship to the city. The urban environment is kind of a very different sort of context, but also an urban environment that has some of my own mnemonic anchors, Etihad Square, these early examples of public art or monuments in the city, and how so many of us have these shared kind of memories of them. This sculpture is sort of looking out to that, and it's using or borrowing that language of the icon, if some of you may know, it's those series of really large sculptures near the cultural foundation that are like a della and a medkhan and these real icons of kind of heritage and history, and kind of reflecting about what would an icon like that kind of mean today in the contemporary identity of Abu Dhabi, and drawing on this idea of the crown, which is an important symbol that recurs a lot in my work. That is one that is kind of playing with the duality of the crown signifying power and dominion and authority, but also, you know, how can we use knowledge as power, knowledge of self, awareness of self, and awareness of history and identity. So the crown becomes a kind of figure for wisdom and kind of a shared knowledge and a shared history.
Both of them really interesting marketplace, and also just with the images you have of how you actually look through into spaces through them to really kind of echoes with the ideas that you're speaking about. Sojung, I was wondering if you could speak to your works, your earlier works are started in sculptural forms, and then you moved into more video works. So I was wondering about the significance of materiality for you.
물론 어떤 뭐 부피라든지 무게라든지 중력을 다루는 굉장히 전통적인 조각에 대한 이 스터디를 했고, 그리고 이후에는 이 서사에 대한 관심을 가지고 비디오로 확장을 하게 됐습니다. 그런데 또 이 제가 만든 비디오의 어떤 촉각성에 관한 언급들을 또 많이 하시곤 하는데, 사실은 제가 비디오를 다룰 때에도 그것이 가지고 있는 굉장히 어떤 다층적인 측면들을 동시적으로 그리고 공간적으로 이해하고 있다라고 볼 수 있을 것 같아요.
Yeah, so
그래서 사실 비디오 안에도 그것을 구성하고 있는 어떤 시간이라든지 속도라든지 어떤 컬러라든지 음성이라든지 그런 것들이 굉장히 다층적으로 작용하고 있고, 특히 공간이 놓여 있을 때 그것이 어떻게 또 관객의 몸을 통해서 다시 활성화 될 수 있다라고 생각을 하고 있습니다. 아마 최근의 작업들을 조금 소개할 수 있을 것 같은데요. 싱코피라는 작업이고요. 싱코피는 뭐 물론 당김음을 표현하기도 하고 어떤 언어에서의 축약 현상을 의미하기도 하고, 그리고 어떤 실신되는 상태를 얘기하기도 하는데요. 이것은 한국의 동료 음악인들의 어떤 디스플레이스먼트 혹은 디아스포라에 관한 경험들을 배경으로 하는 일종의 음악을 함께 작곡한 여행기와 같은 작품입니다. 이 작업 안에서 조금 또 굉장히 조각적인 하나의 실험이 등장하는데요. 여기서는 사실 물론 영상도 있고 조각도 있고 또 증강현실을 활용하기도 하면서 그것을 물질적으로 그리고 디지털적으로 그리고 상징적으로 좀 살펴보고 있습니다.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the title of the work? Because I was reading about the history of it and the ideas of the particular title, and it was really interesting. So. Yes.
초반에 설명하긴 했었는데요. 이것이 사실은 이 작품 전체에 걸쳐서 가지고 있었던 아이디어는 어떤 굉장히 개별적인 존재들의 고유한 리듬에 대한 생각들이 있었어요. 그리고 그것이 어떤 단일화된 단선적인 이 어떤 근대라는 시간을 벗어나는 것으로서 조금 생각을 했었습니다. So my idea was how various existence operate according to their own like distinct tempos. Beyond that, the kind of like singular speed of the modernity. That was kind of like background of my idea. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Rand, I'd also, as Sojung had mentioned her most recent project, it was interesting to hear about your recent works as well, your recent research.
Well, actually, I wanted to maybe just, like, in response to the question around video and sculpture, because similar to you, I think, you know, starting off in a very sculptural practice, but storytelling is such a kind of important aspect of it, because as you're kind of researching or kind of compiling these materials, there was a moment where I felt like a retelling was needed, you know, like a kind of narrative that almost animates the work. And so I wanted to, I don't know if it's this way. Yeah, this way. Like this work, May It Be Remembered, that is attempting to tell the history of a particular site in Iraq in the north called Hatra. Which is near Mosul. It was a site of a kind of pre-Islamic Arab civilization that was, you know, very much kind of isolated through these city walls that fell, and the ruins are still there today, but it's gone through these kind of multiple cycles of, you know, occupation, destruction, most recently with ISIS occupying the site and actually attempting to destroy many of the buildings there. And as I was sort of compiling all of this material and trying to make sense of it, you know, there are so many recurring characters, recurring symbols or icons, and I felt that I wanted to create a work that was, you know, using, let's say, the three main characters of the earth, the sun, and salt, to kind of retell the story of this site, almost as these discrete glimpses into a particular moment. You know, these like incisions into history that reveal particular moments that are quite, you know, specific to the site, but again speak to a broader history. So I wanted to you know. You see as the installation, it's a group of sculptures that are made using kind of like traditional mud bricks, like the earth itself, which is a very interesting kind of material to work with because it operates both almost as stone, but if you add water, it operates as clay. So it was an interesting kind of sculptural experience. But then how do you start to animate these sculptures to almost become characters in the story? And so I have a very short clip of this work. رؤى ضريرة تكفن النور عندما يغشى الغسق خيالات أطياف تلزم الوصية أمام وعد بالفجر كاذب يبزغ النسر على الشارة يمد البصر يفرد جناحيه حاذر الاحتلال ليس امتلاك فهذه الأرض لا تكترث تبتلع الفريسة تبتلع المفترس. And in this particular chapter, it's really looking at this character, the eagle. And the eagle was historically the kind of symbol of the city, because it was called the city of the sun, and the eagle had these, you know, connotations of rising, and but also was a symbol of war. And then the eagle takes on a new meaning with the American invasion, where you have the Marine Corps that are stationed there, whose, you know, I don't know what you would call it, their flag. Also contains an eagle with outstretched wings that is meant to represent that nothing is beyond their reach. And then you have ISIS, who model their flag on what they say historically is the flag of the Prophet Muhammad that was nicknamed the eagle. And so the eagle kind of starts to become this character that morphs and shifts, but always represents some form of dominion, some form of someone trying to take authority. And the work is sort of, thinking about how the land is also resisting.
Thank you. I'm realizing that we're almost out of time, but I would like to give the opportunity for some questions to the audience. If anyone has any questions for not seeing any hands because it's quite dark. Well, okay. Yes, please, go ahead.
As an architect, it helped you to transition from sculpture to poetry and then on to art.
Well, there was a moment in time where I was applying to architecture school and taking an Ottoman history class and telling myself, like, if I'm not getting into architecture school, how do I convince my parents to let me pursue history? But architecture, I think, is really kind of foundational in thinking about, form across scale and also how we kind of inhabit the world. And I think it also kind of gave me this way of kind of understanding, the way the relationship of the body to the work, which is something I'm always thinking about, like how the viewer is sort of positioned or how the viewer inhabits. I don't think it kind of prepared me for a poetic training, but maybe more the poetics of like space.
Yeah, because your rendition is really very impressive. The visuals are very strong, and that's why I was wondering how does it pan out now for you? You're going places already. What's the next project? What more?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I think that was a question that Tina wanted to kind of discuss. So maybe it's a chance to kind of share what the ongoing research for both of us. But I just came back from a residency in Mexico where I spent a lot of time in a bricklayer's studio. And I'm kind of reflecting on craft, a craft that is actually quite ancient, that hasn't changed much from 5,000 years. It's mud, it's water, and it's wooden molds. But how do you think about the bricklayer as almost like a storyteller, a keeper of history and time? So I'm doing a lot of work that's kind of exploring that right now.
저는 최근에 중앙아시아를 다녀왔어요. 사실 카자흐스탄을 다녀왔고 그곳에 뭐 이를테면 아시아와 유럽 사이에 놓여 있는 땅의 그 시간을 조금 보고 싶었던 것 같아요. 그리고 그 일종의 실크로드가 단순히 어떤 교역로가 아니라 어떤 국가 혹은 인간들의 어떤 이동 혹은 기억들을 나누는 하나의 스트럭처이자 그것들을 나누는 굉장히 어떤 유연한 것으로서 조금 생각하면서 그 중앙아시아를 보는 시간들을 가졌고요.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Oh yes, go ahead.
In the video channel you have earlier, before it, there's a footage of the DMZ zone. So, like, was that supposed to be a preview to the piece? Is it connected? Or are they two completely separate artworks? Is there a reason you put that there?
그 작품을 아까 사실은 소개를 못 드렸는데 아마 티나가 장소성에 관한 질문에서 제가 얘기를 하려고 빼놓았었던 부분이고 그린 스크린이라는 제목의 분리된 독립적인 작품입니다. 그래서 thank you. 2021년도에 이 팬데믹 당시에 미술관 내부에서 전시를 하게 되지 못했을 때 이 야외 전광판을 이용해서 전시를 만드는 프로젝트가 있었어요. 그때 제가 그 녹색의 풍경을 이 도시의 한가운데로 가지고 오는 것을 아이디어를 가지고 있었습니다. 하지만 이 풍경은 녹색의 풍경은 사실은 그 DMZ, Demilitarized Zone이고 남한과 북한 사이에 놓여 있는 긴장이 굉장히 높은 장소이고 그리고 80년에 가까운 시간 동안 사람의 손길이 닿지 않아서 굉장히 이 자연이 아이러니하게도 보존된 장소이기도 했죠. 그래서 사실은 저는 여기서 이 DMZ라는 장소를 하나의 영화적인 용어로 얘기하면 뭐 아쿠스마티크한 공간, 이 장막 뒤로 무언가 보이진 않지만 소리로서 존재를 느낄 수 있는 이 아쿠스마티크한 어떤 상황들을 설정하면서 이 굉장히 긴 분단의 시간 동안에 남과 북이 서로를 향했던 일종의 환대와 적대의 순간들을 좀 소리로서 그리고 싶었었던 것 같습니다. 사실은 굉장히 작업에서는 그 미디어적인 혹은 기술적인 전유라는 것이 굉장히 중요한데 여기서는 글리치라는 것을 뭐 이미지의 어떤 전송 가운데 발생하는 오류를 좀 적극적으로 사용하고 있고요. 이런 기술적인 오류를 통해서 사실은 우리가 어떤 것들을 좀 잊고 있었는지 혹은 떠올릴 수 있는지를 질문하면서 이를테면은 우리가 폐허 가운데서 과거에 꿈꿨던 어떤 욕망, 미래를 향한 욕망 같은 것들을 떠올리듯이 좀 상상을 하고 있습니다.
Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank both artists so very, very much for being so generous with sharing your practice with us and these really inspiring works. And we very much look forward to seeing materialization of your new research and your new works. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the supporters for this talk as well. Thank you.